Good afternoon, everybody. If you can see, there's a small change between the text in your programs, which is Piracy is good with an exclamation point, to Piracy is good with a question mark. And this is to keep everyone calm as we walk into some uncharted territory. So, the 18th of October 2004 is the day that historians will state that television died. Let me explain what happened. On that day, Sky One, which is a UK satellite broadcaster, showed the premiere episode of the new Battlestar Galactica series. And that show was a co-production between the Sci-Fi Channel in the United States and Sky One, so they're sharing the development costs. Now, Sci-Fi had decided they were going to postpone the premiere of their own version of the series until January of 2005, which is a slow month in American television, so it's easy to make a splash. Okay, all well and good, except there is no such thing as territorial distribution anymore, and of course, as soon as it was broadcast on Sky, the geeks, and let's face it, people watching Sci-Fi Channel in America are going to be geeks, were downloading it after folks in the UK had posted it. Now, there's nothing new there. People have been doing that in various ways for several years. It was the way they were doing it that was different. Because in the last 18 months or so, we've seen the emergence of a new technology which is known as BitTorrent. Now, you've probably heard about BitTorrent. I want to spend a little time today explaining what it is so that I can help you understand why it's changed the economics of distribution so radically. What you see in the center there is a computer. It's just typified by a little box with a little bit of blue in it. Think of it as almost a fluid that's filling up. Those are the bits from a file. And then what you see all around it in that great big wheel are other computers. And each of those computers it's almost as if that central box has got a bunch of straws, and it's sipping a little bit of the file from each of the straws that are connected to all of the other computers on the internet. Now, the reason this protocol is called BitTorrent is because you're only getting a little sip out of each straw, but when you add all of those straws together, you get a mighty flow. So BitTorrent allows you to go a lot of different places in search of the same information. Ask each of these places for a little bit different part of that information. I'll take the beginning part from here, I'll take the middle part from here, I'll take the end part from here, and I'll collate them when they're all on my computer together. But the thing that we don't remember, that most people when they talk about BitTorrent don't remember, is that I'm not at the center of this cloud of computers that are gathering to create a file. Every other computer that's sharing the file is in its own cloud with a whole bunch of other computers. Now, there's a word that's starting to be adopted for this. It's called a swarm. What it means is that as the computers gather together to share information, the more computers that gather together, the more efficiently the information is being shared among them. In other words, popularity is a virtue. Now, this is different from what we've been used to from a decade of netcasting. If you were netcasting something in 1995 and it got popular, your server would crash, or you'd simply flood out all of your data lines. With BitTorrent, it's exactly the reverse. The more popular something is, the easier it is to get to it. Now, what you might think is that the Sci-Fi Channel saw a drop in ratings because they had so many geek fans who downloaded the episode and saw it 3 months before it aired in America. Battlestar Galactica is the most popular series that's ever aired on the Sci-Fi Channel. Why? Here's what I think. A few people downloaded that first episode and went, wow, this is amazing science fiction. And they told their friends, and they told their friends, and they told their friends. And all of a sudden you have 2 to 3 million people, which on a cable channel in America is incredible ratings. That's like South Park ratings. watching a television program. Why? Because a few people, the core fans, managed to get the content, managed to love the content, and managed to spread the word about the content. Now, just 2 months ago, we saw something very similar happen. The BBC has been preparing a new version of Doctor Who, the first version in 15 years. They sent a copy of it over to the CBC, their Canadian production partner, and it leaked. No one knows how, no one knows why. Someone got fired, we've heard that much. But somehow, somewhere in the CBC production chain, it ended up on the internet. People started downloading it madly. People went, it's not so bad. I think I actually might watch it. I think I'll tell my friends I might watch it. Doctor Who's been getting a 35 share in his series on BBC. So it's probably some of the highest ratings Doctor Who has ever seen. So it seems as though this act of piracy has really only been fanning the flames of interest. Now, we have to recognize that audiences are technically savvy, and they're growing more savvy. Young audiences are very savvy. They get what they want. And the thing that we've taught them from 50 years of television, from 10 years of the web, is that they want it now. That's what we've actually taught them by having a box that you turn on and sit down and enjoy. We've taught them that on-demand entertainment is an immediate reality, that it is the logic, it is the narrative of the box itself, separate from any programming. But of course, people are very concerned about piracy. So what we're doing now is we're sending a message that's at variance with the logic that we've given them over 50 years. We're telling them, no, you can't have this now. It's not yours, it's mine. And so audiences are understandably confused, because really what they're doing in this act of piracy is they're reacting naturally to their own enjoyment and pleasure of the experience of the program. But the programmers are saying, but no, you can't do this. We own this. You can't see it until we tell you and unless we tell you. And this is, in a sense, the core of the problem, is that there's a disconnect between the audience and the producer. And of course, this is natural, because piracy has presented us with a basic economic problem. How do you make money off of something that viewers are getting for free? How do you make money if you've lost control of the distribution channel? Because the way it worked before is there's a producer, there's a distributor, there's a broadcaster, there's an advertiser. Money flows from the advertiser back up through that chain, and if you're lucky, some of it ends up with the producer. And that's kept television production going for 50 years. But of course now we've sort of broken that chain, because the advertiser, who's looking for viewers to see their ads, doesn't have an audience if the audience has just gone and grabbed the program directly. So the economic value chain has fallen apart in the face of piracy. Now, you hear people say, oh, well, we're going to go to some model like iTunes. People will buy their shows for 50 cents. Let me tell you something. People expect television to be free. And in the UK, particularly because they pay, whatever, £125 a year for free television, they really expect it to be free. Now, people pay for movies when they choose to pay for movies. Well, people will say, well, people pay for cable, they pay for satellite. They aren't paying for the programs. You know what they're paying for there? They're paying for choice. That's the difference. And when you have broadband, you have infinite choice. So how do cable and how does satellite compete with that? So, we have a hell of a paradox coming. We have the best technology yet invented for the distribution of television programming. And it's one that seems to be intent on destroying the economic model of television. Now, if BitTorrent had been invented, say, in 1992 rather than in 2002, we would have come across this problem a decade ago. And it seems that BitTorrent is actually producing an upsurge in the adoption of broadband, that it is in some sense the killer app for broadband adoption, that all of a sudden there's a reason to have broadband. But we have this fundamental disconnect between producer and audience in the economic value chain, and unless we can actually fix that problem, things are going to fall apart. Now, what I want to do in this talk is present a possible value chain that solves these problems, that in fact, rather than being afraid of piracy, says we can harness piracy. That piracy, because it really represents the viewer's desire to get to the programming, is a force that we can harness for economic gain. But before we do that, let's take a look at the current economic model for television in Australia, because it's illuminating and it will show you the kinds of forces that are coming to bear to change the landscape of television. So, I want to familiarize you with the word, if you don't know what it is, oligopoly. Oligopoly is the monopoly of the few, and it describes the commercial television environment of Australia. And it's because of oligopoly that we have a relatively limited broadcast spectrum. We have 3 commercial networks through which most television programming that originates outside of Australia flows through. There are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many prime time hours. So, in fact, the amount of prime time programming that reaches Australia is restricted, you could argue artificially, by the fact that there are a limited number of commercial broadcasters. That means that prime-time commercial broadcast space is the prime real estate, period, in the broadcast hemisphere. And it means, as a side effect, that 10 and 9 and 7 are the most profitable television networks in the world, or among the most profitable television networks in the world. Now, what are the economics behind that? It's very simple. You buy low and you sell high. And the best current example of this is the most popular television program in Australia at present, Desperate Housewives. Now, I want to thank very publicly the television students because they helped me do a lot of my factual research on this next chart. I sat and did some television commercial counting on the broadcast on Monday night of Desperate Housewives, and I counted 18 30-second ads and 20 15-second ads. And we know, because we did a little backstreet work, that the 30-second ads cost between $50,000 and $100,000 a pop. And that means that they're making somewhere between $1.3 and $2.6 million per national broadcast of Desperate Housewives. How much are they paying for the program? Best guess, between $50,000 and $80,000. Now that's good business. All right. How can you maintain that business? Because there's no effective competition. All right. You're probably all familiar with the idea of arbitrage, which is basically taking advantage of the fluctuations in markets so that you can reap an economic benefit. Well, this is an artificial market supported by the fact that there are only 3 commercial television stations. So there can be a very, very broad difference in sale price and purchase price. It's under attack. Now, a study was released back in February which indicated that per capita, Australians already download more television than any other people on the planet. The UK actually in raw numbers outstrips us. But if you just go by population size, Australia downloads twice as much television as the British do. Why? There are a lot of reasons for this. People point at the television programmers and say they're always changing the time of my programs, or they waited 5 years to show the last season of Voyager, or they aren't even going to show this program at all. I have this issue with Arrested Development, which I haven't seen because it started after I left America, but I've been hearing how wonderful it is. So people will go where they need to go to get these programs. We've spent 50 years learning how great television is, learning how great a well-told story can be. And we won't, if we have the technological means, let things stand in the way of that pleasure. We simply won't. And Australians are very forthright about that. Now, an oligopoly can only sustain its position when there's no competitive influence. And there's no commercially competitive influence right now with respect to this oligopoly. But there is essentially a private conflict there. There's a private force that's working against this solitary or singular market influence in television program distribution, which is the individual going out and finding the things they want, downloading them, and watching them. And keep in mind that that trend's only going to accelerate as more and more Australians adopt broadband. We have about, what, 20 to 25% broadband penetration in Australia right now. And already, with a much lower broadband adoption than in the UK, we use it far more often for television programming. So the precedent has been set. Behaviors are in play now that are going to be devilishly difficult to pull up. Okay, so let's talk about the economics of hyperdistribution. If we say that, okay, there's this piracy issue over here, and there's this oligopoly over here, how can we as producers work in that marketplace? Point one, the one thing that a television producer wants more than anything else is viewers. Why? Because from viewers, you can get everything else. If you're a TV producer and you can't figure out how to turn viewers into money, you should not be producing television. All right? But the fundamental reason to create a television broadcast is to have people watch it. So if you look at it in that light, through those lenses, then it becomes immediately clear that a hyperdistribution of a television program, which allows millions of people all around the world to see that program, is actually the best possible thing you could have as a television producer, with the exception that we haven't had an economic model that allows you to realize any benefit from it. All right, seems reasonable. So, how do you extract money from the viewers? You don't. Again, you extract money from the advertisers. That's what they're for. Okay, so let me explain the thought process that leads to the beginning of this model. I downloaded, this is before Channel 10 made any announcement that Battlestar Galactica was going to be shown in Australia. It was. I downloaded and watched 13 episodes of Battlestar Galactica. I did.
Previously on Battlestar Galactica.
No, tell me you're a machine.
And
a robot.
I'm sitting and watching it, and there's 13 hours that I'm watching, and this is the very beginning of the very first episode, and as you can see in the upper left-hand side of the screen, there's something that we're all familiar with, although we don't tend to notice it very consciously. It's a bug. And that bug is telling me the provenance of this program, that this program came from Sky One. Okay, great. And I'm watching 1 hour and another hour and another hour and another hour. And by the time I'm at about hour 7 and I've been staring at that bug quietly, subconsciously for 7 hours, the penny drops. And I realize that I am looking at the most valuable piece of real estate in the human universe. All right? And I'm also looking at the most underutilized piece of real estate in the human universe. It would be like someone taking the point of land that the Sydney Opera House is on and using it for a train depot. And I realized that there was a complete misconnect economically because Sky One means nothing to me. I live in Australia. The Sky One satellite's on the other side of the Earth. I can't pick it up. I can't even pirate it. It's just not even available. So that payload that is meaningful if you live in the UK is meaningless if you live in Australia. So that's when I started to get thinking, wait a minute, what if that payload carried an advertisement? What would that look like? Well, it might look like this.
News of the fashion show spread quickly on Wisteria Lane. Though the event was for charity, Gabrielle soon discovered when
It's
it
simple.
came to the latest fashions,
It's subtle.
women are seldom charitable.
It's not doing a whole lot, but of
No
course,
one knew this better
the first
than
thing it needs to do is
BitTorrent.
simply reinforce the brand of Australia's. Is it Australia's largest
She
retailer? I think it
understood
may
that
be.
treachery never goes out of style.
Now, can we turn that
Susan.
down just a little bit? Thank you. I just did this as a simple test to see if it would work, and of course it works fine. It's completely clear. I predict that as this model unfolds, as what I'm telling you becomes more commonplace, there is going to be an explosion of broadcast design in the bug. All right? Because everyone's going to be fighting a subtle war between producing a bug that gets a lot of information across and a bug that the viewer finds obnoxious. And there's a real balance point that's going to be located there. My bug is quiet because I only barely use After Effects. I really just have started. Otherwise, I'd have it flipping and doing things, and singing and dancing. But right now, it's just telling you that it's Meyer.
Bigly.
Okay.
No, you tell that son of a bitch Tanaka that if he doesn't call me in an hour, I'm going to go down to his office, find him, and kick his ass. Ladies.
Trouble at work?
Now, I thought I was onto something. I thought, this is a unique idea I've come up with. I've got to tell the world. My God, it's amazing. And then I turned on the footy on Friday night, and let me show you what I saw.
We've seen no semblance of that tonight. Here's a good run by Watmo. Turning on the retro rockets, he'll go there. And Watmo, who has not stopped slaving, gets a try for Manly to put them on the board.
Yeah, if anyone deserves a try tonight for the side that is going to get beaten, it is Anthony Watmo. He's really troubled the opposition on the rare occasions where they've had some ball control. He's a bit of a pocket rocket, and he runs a great angle.
I'll
here.
go into the instant replay.
So he frees it there. You can see that he's going
Oh my God.
between that gap.
Nine's already there. Imagine my surprise.
As play continues, it's not a straight run, it's the angled run.
So the networks are already hip to this, and you know what that means? The advertisers are already hip to this. They're ready for this model. So here's the thing. This is going to happen anyway. This is going to happen whether or not you start downloading TV, because the 30-second ad is over. It's getting too easy for the consumer to edit out, to skip over, to ignore the interruption. Now, we can make an interesting argument about whether everything will be interactive so that you have to sit through the ads, but I really do think that at some level the viewer is going to have a limited acceptance of this, and Gary indicated as much. We're going to have to find a comfortable way to get advertising payload into all television programming, regardless of its source, without resorting to advertising. Or I should say, without resorting to advertising breaks. Because the viewer's expectation now is for a continuous experience, and then another continuous experience, and then another continuous experience. And the closer we can get to that level of seamlessness by embedding advertising inside of the program stream, the happier the viewer is going to be overall with the experience, the happier the broadcaster would be with the experience because it prevents channel flipping. Everyone gets happy. But here's the thing. What's the role of a television broadcaster in that value chain? Right now, they aggregate audiences on one hand, and they aggregate advertisers on the other hand, and they connect them, and poof, piles of money appear. That's how that works. But is it more cost-effective for a producer to work directly with an advertiser to hyper-distribute programming? Yeah, it's not just a little more cost-effective. It's insanely more cost-effective. All right? These are ballpark figures, but they're within, say, 50% correct. All right? So for the price of one advertisement in Desperate Housewives, Meyer could brand it and release it. For the cost of one advertisement in Battlestar Galactica, Harvey Norman could brand it and release it. And here's the kicker. The higher the program ratings, the cheaper your ad buy is. That's every advertising agency's wet dream. All right? It's the reverse of the logic of television, where the larger the audience, the more you're going to pay for that ad buy. Now, of course, you're going to tussle with the producer, because the producer is going to charge you more for something that's guaranteed to have an audience. but you're never going to pay what you're paying for a broadcast network because the economics of scarcity in distribution have gone away. Okay. So now we've moved from an old-style value chain where you have producers to distributors to broadcasters to advertisers, and now you have a new value chain, which just the producer and the advertiser working together, presumably in harmony, to make it all happen. Now, we've got to start addressing some questions that get raised by this model immediately. Could this model work in the United States, where a lot of this programming, for instance, Desperate Housewives, gets made? Can it scale up to that level? Well, Desperate Housewives, CSI, ER, they all cost in the range of roughly $5 million an episode to make. Can you attach enough advertisers to an episode of that program to justify hyper-distributing it? Even if you take the raw economics of Australia and multiply them by 15, the difference in the population, all right, your ad buy costs in America are only going to be slightly more expensive than the distribution costs are here in Australia. Australians get very cheap programs because they're at the end of a distribution chain. Relative to their population, Australians should probably be paying what? $400,000 for an episode of Desperate Housewives? So it's clear that a hyper-distribution model will work because of the economy of scale in America, because there's a pool of advertisers. So it works there, but does it work now also for local content? Let's say McCloud's The Daughters of Blue Heelers, which regularly get probably 10 or 15, 20% ratings. And it's well known that a broadcast network will not cover the production costs of a local television production. They simply refuse to do it. They cover what is in the order of 30, 35% of the production cost, I believe. But if, on the other hand, McCloud's Daughters is making a deal directly with Meijer or with David Jones or with Woolies or Kohl's, they might be able to cover 60 or 70% of their production cost easily because the entire process has become a lot cheaper for everyone involved, with the exception of the broadcast networks, because the broadcast networks have lost their ability to be the sole distributors of pre-produced television programming. Now, does that mean that the broadcast networks are going out of business? Hardly. The broadcast networks are converging on a future that looks like their past. They began live and they will end live. Live things can't be hyper-distributed. Doesn't work that way. Now, I'm not saying that some technology won't come along in 2 or 3 or 5 years that gives us the same capability with live programming that we have now with pre-made or pre-produced programming. That could happen. But right now, the corner on live television programming belongs to the networks. So that means sport, that means event and reality and game programming, and that means news. And Australians excel at all of those, and all of those are still going to be enormously valuable to advertisers because they will still aggregate eyeballs. But the rest of the programming is going to become a fragmented sea of opportunities where producers and advertisers will be working together to hyper-distribute content to the viewing audience. Now, it's unknown, because no one's really done any survey research here, what percentage of Australians are downloading their television programming right now. I'm figuring it's probably between 3 and 4% of the total population. But that demographic is males between 18 and 25 years old. That's the magic demographic. That's the demographic that went away. That's the demographic that's not watching TV anymore. Or wait, they are. They're just not watching it in front of a box anymore. They're downloading it and watching it where they please, when they please, on the device they please. And this is something that we have to accept and understand, is that television has been freed from its shackles of a box in a lounge room. Television is now on the mobile. Television is now in your hand with a PlayStation Portable. Television is on your laptop. Television is on your desktop. Television is popping up in more and more and more different places. And if you're a smart producer, you're going to want to capitalize on the fact that those moments are showing up all over the place and that the target demographics you're looking for are constantly using those devices, constantly having those devices with them. Now, there's another big caveat. Only maybe 20-25% of Australians have broadband right now. In 5 years, that'll be a different story, but I really am talking about today. I'm not trying to tell you that there's some magical future where this is going to happen. I'm going to tell you that there's a real model now. There are only 20 or 25% of Australian homes with broadband, but there are at least 70% of Australian homes with at least one DVD player. This is going to sound ridiculous. That's what I like about it. If you bought the rights to Desperate Housewives, 4 hours of it anyway, printed up 5 million DVDs, and then mailed them to 5 million households in Australia, you'd be paying exactly the same for your advertising as you would if you went to 7. And if maybe you had a partnership with, say, a newspaper so you didn't have to mail them and saved yourselves the 30 cents. And oh wait, we already distribute DVDs with newspapers. That's right. Well, then you've made it even cheaper. So you could do TV by mail, not just TV by wire, and TV by newspaper. And with the cross-ownership laws about to change, as clearly they are about to do, you're going to start seeing newspapers using TV as a way to promote themselves. This is going to happen. There are a lot of ways of getting television programming into the hands of the audience once that television programming has been freed from the idea that it has to go over the air. And of course, the beautiful thing about a DVD is that it's no longer appointment viewing, that in fact your ratings on a DVD will be higher than they are on equivalent TV broadcast, and you'll probably have a handoff rate similar to a magazine, so that one DVD can pass through several hands and several people will see it. Now, I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous to send DVDs out to all the households in Australia, but I want you to imagine my surprise in the 90s when AOL was becoming a large company, and several times a year they would mail out CDs to every single household in America. They would mail out 105 million CDs. It got so bad, my friends were using them for coasters. One of my friends made a prom dress out of AOL CDs. They were everywhere. They were junk. So this idea actually isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Now, that's all good, and I'm sure you're thinking of some problems with this argument, and I need to take them on as best I can right now. The first argument is the inertia argument. It's ever been thus, it will ever be thus. But here's the thing. Because of BitTorrent, and a BitTorrent, it's a bit like the atom bomb. You can't uninvent it, all right? Because of BitTorrent, the audience is now in control of distribution, all right? Whether or not the audience is choosing to use that control, to execute that authority, that's immaterial. There is a specific portion of your audience, young males 18 to 25, who are exhibiting that control. As that technology passes through the culture over the next 5 to 10 years, the entire audience will be exerting their control over distribution. So inertia is really not a valuable argument here because it assumes that the present and the future are anything like the past, and they aren't. There's a new distribution technology in town, and it's changing everything. And we have to recognize that the places that people want to watch television have changed. Again, we have this profusion of devices showing up everywhere. And people want these devices to have the same sorts of experiences on them as they do with the telly in the living room. Okay, there's another objection. Right now, producers are making a lot of money selling DVDs, television programs, and they can't recoup that money if they've released a program into hyperdistribution. Now, there's a bit of a yes and a no here, because I really do think that there's going to be a future market in high-definition DVDs for television shows. But I really want to stress something. The blip that we've seen over the last 36 months with the profound revenues, I mean, Fox declared a dividend profit in the last quarter of 2003 because of sales of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the X-Files DVDs. That's a blip because it existed in a period of time between when television turned into bits and when those bits really sort of woke up to their nature as these ephemeral, copyable things. You can't really, although you try, you can't really lock a bit down. You can't really prevent a bit from being copied. It's their essential nature. So there was a bit of a moment between DVD for television and BitTorrent where you could make a whole windfall over television program distribution via DVD. It's not sustainable in the long run because it existed before there were effective technologies to move those bits around. But trust me, people at Warner Brothers and at Fox, they're going to scream high heaven because they have written into all their spreadsheets that they have another $2 billion a year coming in from DVD revenues. Well, it's not going to happen, but it's going to be expressed as an objection. All right. Well, if everyone's getting their programs off BitTorrent, and if the networks aren't broadcasting the programs anymore, how am I going to know what to watch? All right? This is a big essential argument. What's on? Well, if everything's on, how do I know what's good to watch? Well, there's this sense, I think promoted by the broadcast networks, that people watch something on the broadcast networks because the broadcast networks tell them to sit down, shut up, and watch what's on. It doesn't really work that way. The world never really worked that way, but it's becoming clear that the world doesn't work that way. Let me show you how the world really works. New York Times, about 2 months ago, read an article about a new series called Robot Chicken. I was going to show you a tiny little excerpt right here.
Of 7 strangers
to live in house
And have their lives taped.
Find out what happens when people stop being polite and start getting real.
The real world. Metropolis.
So I read this article and I forwarded it to one of my friends. And like a week later, he presents it to me. I downloaded this. I think you're really going to like it. And I watched the first episode, and it was amazing. And now there's this little cloud of freak Australians who are just sort of all keeping up on Robot Chicken. We've liked it, so we've told our friends, and they've told their friends, and so on and so on and so on. That's the way a TV show gets popular. It's because you know people are watching it. That's what happened to Battlestar Galactica. That's what's happening to Doctor Who. The examples are becoming more and more and more pronounced. You don't need a television station to tell you what to watch. You need to listen to your friends and maybe look out for yourself, but that's all you're going to need. All right. It's too hard to download TV, and I have to admit that the amount of work that you have to go through right now is beyond, say, probably 90-95% of most of the computer-using population. And they said the same thing about music before Napster and iTunes came along. And now downloading music is just a no-brainer. Because the objection to how hard this is, that's an objection to the interface. It's not an objection to the technology itself. The technology itself is hidden from you. It's an objection to how hard it is to find something and figure out how to download it and play it. Well, I've got to think that there's some clever hacker or some clever company here or in America or in Europe that's hard at work on this problem right now. What we're experiencing right now is a bit of an interregnum, a bit of a gap in time between when we have the capability to do this and when this capability becomes so commonplace that we don't even think about it anymore. But if we were having this conversation back 5 years ago in 2000 with respect to music downloading, once everyone had sort of shouted out about how bad Napster was and how it was destroying the music business, people would say, but there are no other alternatives. There's no good way to make people pay for music. There's no system. And then iTunes comes along and it changes everything because they thought through how you want to use it. That's all it's going to take, is someone to sit down and think through how it gets used, how to make it useful, and then all of this falls into place. Now, first question we have to ask is who's going to be the tall poppy here? It might be one of you folks in the room. It's going to be an aggressive young producer who has a property that cannot be picked up by distribution for some reason or another. All right, or will not. It's too short, it's too weird, it's too sexy. Who knows what it is? All right, but he can't just run off to 10, 7, or 9. Okay, so what's he going to do? He's going to go find a hip advertiser. He's going to go find a Nike. He's going to go find a BMW. And let me tell you, just this week, great big article in the New York Times, Sony is now paying Heavy.com, web content house, to provide free video downloads for their PlayStation Portable, so that people can watch video on their PlayStation's Portable. All right? It's already happening. It's already happening. I'm not talking in the future tense. Okay? All we need to do is start to bring advertisers into this equation, and you now have a fully fleshed out, sustainable economic model. And then, as Gary pointed to at the end of his talk, there's the threat from underneath, the thing that could wipe us all out. All right? Google and Yahoo are now creating video services. Anyone can upload a video to Google right now. It's not clear what Google does with it. I think they eat the video and they burp and say, But within a few months, you're going to be able to search all of those videos and download any of them. And the same thing is true for Yahoo. All right? And this flattens distribution out enormously. So those are some of the competitive forces that are coming into play here that the independent producer will have to deal with and that the broadcast networks will also have to deal with. Okay, so let's bring this back. What are some concrete things that we have to keep in mind when we're dealing in this environment where we've accepted that hyperdistribution is not an enemy to be fought, but a force of nature to be harnessed? Well, let's break it down. Create content that's valuable globally. It is important to have Australian stories and Australian voices, and I'm sorry I don't have an Australian voice as I'm saying this. It is important for that to be the case. Obviously important. There is a role for that, and that role belongs to the national broadcasters and the national funding agencies. But if you're creating content that you want to hyper-distribute among the, say, 420 million English-speaking people in the world, and that's an enormous marketplace, then you have to consider writing for them, telling stories for them. Now, you also have to be able to distribute your content globally, and that's more than just putting it out on BitTorrent. You have to establish advertiser relationships in every territory that your work's going to be used in, because you want to make sure that all of your work is carrying advertising payload that's appropriate to the territory it's in. We're back to this entire discussion of Sky One versus meaning nothing to me. All right? You want to make sure that you're doing distribution, hyper-distribution in each territory. And there are techniques that allow you to do this. They'll allow you to make sure that a user in America gets American branding, and a user in Australia gets Australian branding. There are techniques that will work for this, but you have to establish those relationships. Now, That fell to the distributor before. So some more work is being placed on the producer. On the other hand, you're also, as a producer, getting more money for your work, so you should be able to support that. Rule 2, shorter is better and funnier is better. There are more and more and more moments for television viewing on more and more different kinds of devices. But those moments are spread throughout the day. It's not just sitting down and watching 3 hours of telly at night. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is another segment from Robot Chicken, but if you'll notice, I've carefully added some branding to it. This is what I think the future of television looks like.
Where's the bunny? Wiggle your big toe. Great. I am Jesus, you know. Five-fingered palm of death. Try that again.
Thanks.
It's what I do. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? For a second there, yeah, I kinda did.
Now, that doesn't mean you can't produce epics, but it's not clear that you're going to be able to spread those epics as widely as you like. They're large files, which is a small objection, but that people have not so much shorter attention spans, but they have more demands on their attention now than they had before. If you're going to tell a drama, if you're going to tell an epic, then when you approach your writing task, think about how to deliver it in pieces. Now, I've been working with some folks down in Melbourne who will be delivering dramatic, probably sort of more melodramatic content on mobile phones, and they're going to be delivering it 3 minutes, 3 times a week. So they're producing 9 minutes of content every week, or about an hour a month. And that seems like it's a good size, it's a good area, it's a good form to be working in. We're going to see a lot of explosions with this as we work in different sizes and different forms. But the general rule is shorter is better and funnier is better. Rule 3. When you walk out of here, the world will look pretty much the same as it did before. But it's already going on. It's already happening. There are erosive and transformative forces in the world of television. The erosive forces are that audiences are leaving the broadcast model for a model of hyperdistribution. The transformative model is that because of hyperdistribution, any individual is potentially now a global distributor of content. But it's going to take 5 years. It's going to take a lot more broadband deployment. It's going to take a lot more successful relationships between advertisers and producers. But before this year is out, I'll go down on record saying this, before this year is out, we will see a successful hyper-distributed television program. It might be short form, it'll carry branding with it, and hundreds of millions of people will see it. Rule 4. Do it or die. This is the future of television production. It's not the only future. There's a future for broadcast television, but broadcast television is going to be geared around things that require a continuous presence in front of a box. Interactive TV is an important part of that. Interactive TV is a reason to be with the box live. It's a reason not to change the channel. Sport television, news television. There's a domain that broadcasting will own, but it's not the entire domain, which is what they've got now. So if you're going to continue to work as a television producer, you're going to have to adapt your production practices, and you're going to have to adapt your distribution strategies to meet where the market is going, where the audience is already taking you because the audience is in control of distribution. Now, there's a good thing here. Australians know how to make inexpensive, high-quality television. Americans do not know how to make inexpensive, high-quality television. So if you're working with an advertiser, and there are two products, and they're both great products, but one is half the price of the other, which, as the advertiser, as the person who's paying for it, which one are you going to use? All right. So Australia has been a crucible for a generation of television production, which, if we can get behind it, will actually be able to lead the world. And there's the simple point. Now that piracy is good, now that we see it not as an economic evil, but as a force to be harnessed, there are fortunes to be made. Thank you.
Andy had to go, so I'll wrap up. But are there questions for Mark? It's a very thought-provoking presentation, Mark. I mean, I was going to ask you whether you think... I've been kind of mulling over this one. I was thinking, do you think that if you know there weren't any legal kind of barriers to this, could the networks wrap into their deal, their contract that they signed, that they also hyper-distribute as well as broadcast?
If they were smart, they would. I would think that the answer is yes, but I also think that the networks would see this as a competitive threat, because if you're hyper-distributing programming, you're taking eyeballs away from the broadcast. And I'm not sure that they may be, I mean, my feeling is, my attitude is, all eyeballs are good eyeballs if they're looking at what you've branded. But they may be thinking that they'll be dividing the attention of their audience. I mean, it's the same argument that they tend to make with respect to multi-channeling too, right? So if we multi-channel, we'll take the audience away from the main channel. They're seeing these things as being a unity rather than a multiplicity. The future of television is all about multiplicities. Now, even if the broadcasters take their current programs and hyper-distribute them, nothing is going to stop the tidal wave of other programs that are going to be hyper-distributed. And that's the thing that no one, it's the elephant in this room. No one wants to talk about it. But once you've completely flattened distribution, once there are no barriers to distribution, that's it. Everything is on an equal footing. And then the only thing that matters then is quality. And quality spreads, quality gets adopted because someone sees something and tells someone who tells someone who tells someone.
Do you mind just passing that across to Bruce?
Mark, the argument that the end of the distributor, the broadcaster distributor, for that kind of programming is pretty persuasive. But what stops an advertiser arranging with a producer to not just bug a program, but essentially to insert 30-second ads all the way through it, or any other kind of addition to it? That's my first question.
No. But nothing except that the audience will edit it out. That's already happening. In other words, it's the audience. The audience is in control of distribution. That's everything. That's not just how it gets from point A to point B. It's how your program looks when it gets to point B.
Don't you think that I mean, this already happens online. Salon.com now makes you watch a 30-second ad. You can either pay for content on Salon, or you can watch a 30-second ad and get a day pass.
Right.
I think most people would watch the 30-second ad.
I certainly do when I read Salon. Sure.
So why not that? I mean, why wouldn't that be the model?
Salon could not handle 100 million people hitting it simultaneously. All right, Salon can probably handle 1 million people or something simultaneously. There are, okay, this is a good question, but it has to do with scale. If you're interested in having your program go as widely as possible, in other words, if you're interested in using hyperdistribution strategies for it, there's no centralized network that you could build, save maybe Google's, that's big enough to be able to handle feeding data back out to the users at the speed they need. Now, that doesn't mean people won't work on this. If you're working on a smaller scale, it's beyond your capability. Now, Google Video actually looks like it's a very interesting movement in that area. So that's one argument, which is technological. I think there's another argument, which is that, so are you saying that I should be paying a nickel or a quarter or a dime or something to watch my television program?
No, what I'm essentially saying is I think that the control of the advertiser and the input of the advertiser is likely to be to the final product, the product that gets hyper distributed is likely to be stronger and likely to be more intrusive and indeed
okay.
through the program that you're suggesting.
If there were a limited amount of content, that would be a problem. But there isn't a limited amount of content, and so audiences will not adopt or drift toward content that's oppressively intrusive. Okay, I mean, in some sense, it's a combination of market dynamics and mob psychology, because unless this is the best thing ever, there's going to be so much other stuff that's really good, and there already is so much other stuff that is really good. Why would I sit through this intrusive ad? You see what I'm saying? All right, so when you've leveled distribution, when you can get whatever you want, other forces start to come into play, and one of those is, how annoyed am I going to be if I have to watch that program? Does that make sense?
Yeah. People will put up with a lot of...
Yes. That's why I said there's going to be an explosion in broadcast design about how to figure out how to carry advertising payload that's just on the line of being obnoxious.
The other part of that is...
So we just have a question up the back.
Sorry.
Hi, Mark.
Gary.
A possible another addition to your objections, which is controlled versus anarchistic distribution. Hyperdistribution is by nature almost like the laws of the jungle. It reminds me of the film Blade Runner, where you've got this kind of society of controlled distribution, the broadcasters that have control right down to the user, versus hyperdistribution, where it's law of the jungle, anyone can come in there. Particularly, we have the internet at the moment filled with spammers and hackers and spyware and viruses. Hyperdistribution is going to have to find a way through all of that. How do you see that working?
How do you mean find a way through?
Well, it's going to cause blockages in the system as it becomes more and more popular. There are going to be people who want to stop the distribution simply in the ways that they're doing it at the moment on the internet.
Well, BitTorrent is probably the most fault-tolerant network protocol that's yet been invented. So it's enormously difficult to corrupt or to interrupt BitTorrent transfers in themselves. But should someone try, for example, I updated my BitTorrent client that we have running here. We are hyper-distributing some content that we own here at Afters right now. There was a change in the technology that went from a standardized tracker, which meant there was one server that you could go to find out what was there, and it went to a decentralized tracker. This was in a response to the MPAA shutting down some of the very large BitTorrent sites last year. So essentially, and this reflects the history of the internet in general, every time there's an attack on it, it forces the engineers to go and evolve a response to it. And so what you get is essentially an arms race. I don't think that hyperdistribution is going to be, it's not outside the terms of that arms race. It's going to be participating in that same jungle as all of the other types of content.
Sorry, Mark, how does the scenario with the MPAA are chasing sort of teenagers in the US,
right,
and trying to shut everything down? Like I said, all the decent BitTorrent sites have all been closed.
Yeah, but they haven't been closed.
You're always chasing the next, site for where you want your content.
I'm sorry.
I say you're always chasing the next site for where you want to find the content.
Right.
So how does that, when you got the organisations like the MPAA who are trying to shut all these
Right, but they're shutting it down because, I mean, again, they're shutting it down because these are violations of copyright, whereas what I'm saying is that there's a partnership between advertiser and producer, and then there's no violation at all, and the MPAA is going to be really happy because there are non-infringing uses of the technology, which, although they've been told time and time again that Linux people use it to download the software distributions and blah, blah, they haven't really seen it being used for any non-infringing purpose so far. I mean, one of the points here is not just to demonstrate that there are non-infringing uses, but to prove that there's a viable economic model for that. With respect to the distribution of movies and other copyrighted content on that, it's part of the ecology. The music industry has so far adapted, although they bitch and moan, they actually have adapted to that ecology. Presumably Hollywood too, but I don't have any permanent solution for that.
Okay, one final question up the back.
Well, mine's actually not a question because I more or less agree with everything you said, and it sort of covered this a little bit. I've been noticing myself. But could I say that your, especially your ticker, your bug version,
the bug, yeah.
this bug torrent thing that you got going on, and I coined the term. It's a good term, but there's a real case of that existing, and that is in India with VCDs, like video CDs of Bollywood movies, either pirated or not pirated, and if they're not pirated...
But they're carrying advertising bugs.
They carry really intrusive bugs, and half an hour in, you completely forget about it, and they're played on buses when you catch a coach somewhere.
Because it's implanted deep in your consciousness, which is exactly where the advertiser wants it.
It's in Hindi, so I didn't give a... That actual thing exists, and
the further I go, the less original my idea gets. But what the hell? What's wrong with it? But yeah, exactly. It's not. I guess it's not a new idea. It's just bringing it into a domain where there appears to be a problem in order to sort of deal with that. And the thing is, piracy of movies in India is rampant. Piracy of movies in China is rampant. I wonder if the Chinese are doing this now as well. So yeah.
I mean, what you said today makes me think, because I noticed it when I was there. So there's bugs everywhere, and I thought I pirated one that I didn't see the end of because it's so long, and looked on it and had a bug. It had the bug was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And it's just occurred to me. I reckon the studio, or at least the advertiser, or someone has got a cut in that pirate DVD market.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you to all the speakers for today, and thank you all very much for attending. Very interesting presentation.